and thank you very much for coming today to our latest in our series of public lectures on autism. I'm very, very pleased to welcome Chris Mitchell, who's going to speak to us today about mindfulness and Asperger's syndrome. Chris has joined us from Newcastle today. He works in an organisation called Autism Works, which is a social enterprise which specialises in supporting individuals on the autism spectrum in employment, and I think Chris works as software engineer.
Yes, software test analyst.
A software test analyst in that organisation. And today he's going to speak to us about mindfulness, and specifically the way in which Chris uses mindfulness to help him cope with the ups and downs of Asperger's syndrome. Thank you very much, Chris. I will leave the floor to Chris now, and hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Liz, and thank you for inviting me back to Sheffield. It's great to be back in Sheffield after all these years. Great, it's a great time to be in Sheffield as well, with certain events taking on in the town centre, and something which you need quite a lot of for what's taking place currently in Sheffield in the World Snooker Championship. Quite often you need a lot of concentration, especially for a pressure shot, and hopefully that's one of the few things mindfulness might help you with when we eventually go away from here this afternoon. Okay, now there's what I like to do when I give talks about Asperger's syndrome is that I like to give the audience an idea of how it might actually feel to be a person with Asperger's syndrome right here, right now, in this moment, this time. There is at least one person in today's audience I know who, like me, has an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis and who obviously knows what it's like being a person with Asperger's syndrome day in, day out. But for those of you not on the autistic spectrum, probably the best way to imagine what it's like to be a person with Asperger's syndrome, how it can fit in the confusion it can sometimes feel being a person with Asperger's syndrome, is to imagine that you're a Vietnamese motorcycle rider visiting Sheffield, or just about any other UK town or city where we're used to obvious road rules and obvious speed limits. We're used to stopping for pedestrians to cross, but motorcycle riders in Hanoi or in Saigon are not used to waiting for pedestrians to stop. So if you try waiting for traffic to stop in Vietnam, you're likely to be standing there all day because the motorcycle riders don't stop for you. So instead, the way that you cross the road in Vietnam is you do it by walking into the traffic, and the motorcycle riders swerve around you. Now, if you try crossing the road like that in Sheffield, it's very possible that you could be involved in an accident and end up perhaps in one of the buildings over there where the hospital is. But the Vietnamese motorcycle riders in Sheffield would very likely struggle with those conventions, bearing in mind that in Vietnam they're not used to stopping to allow pedestrians to cross the road, rather pedestrians swerving around them. Just a little bit about me, a little bit about my background. I mean, mindfulness is largely about here and now, so I'll get the background over and very quickly. I got my Asperger's syndrome diagnosis in 1998 when I was 20 years old. That was while I was studying at Teesside University, and I'm now 37. As Liz introduced me, I'm operational manager as well as testing software at Autism Works. That's a social enterprise that employs people on the autistic spectrum in software testing. We're actually based on the Specialist Stern model. Has anybody heard of Specialist Stern based in Denmark? You have? Yes, Specialist Stern was one of 2 or 3 models already in existence that Autism Works was based on. And in my spare time, what I've come to talk to you about today, and something that can also help you in different working situations, including in my case concentration that helps being able to spot errors in software scripts. I practice mindfulness to help cope with the ups and downs that Asperger's syndrome, including the confusion it can sometimes bring, especially regarding unwritten social rules. Okay, this is what the focus of today's talk is going to be about, which is mindfulness, and also the purpose of mindfulness, which is to help you tune into the present moment, here and now, just by being with the present moment as it actually is. What's the techniques that I'm going to talk to you about are based on are on the work of John Kabat-Zinn, who was a very well-renowned mindfulness practitioner who was originally a hospital physician. He brought mindfulness into a clinical setting when he noticed working with terminal patients, not just the stress it was causing for the patients, but even more so what it was causing for the relatives of the patients. When he brought mindfulness techniques into the clinical setting, he noticed that people, including the relatives of patients, felt a lot less stressed and found a lot of benefit from living in the moment. And similarly, something that I have seen in mindfulness when applied to autism and to Asperger's syndrome, as well as people on the autistic spectrum themselves, I've also seen it help parents of children and young people on the autistic spectrum, in that it helps them cope with the stress that can come with the challenges that raising a child or young person on the autistic spectrum can sometimes bring. If any of you either are parents and of children or young people on the autistic spectrum themselves, or you work with people on the autistic spectrum in a professional setting, something that you will likely notice is how autism doesn't just affect people diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum, but affects people around them as well. Most in the first instance, often their immediate family. And something that mindfulness does also help us to notice, and however we practice it, is all about where we do things on autopilot, where we do things out of habit that we're not often aware of. And there's a lot of things that go on in and around us that we're not aware of because we're not often tuned in. And the physical aspects of mindfulness, including some mindful yoga, which are also taught in the 8-week course that I did back in 2010, nearly 6 years ago now. They help you to take up positions that are outside your comfort zone, which is what mindfulness, developing mindfulness, is largely about. Just like being a person with Asperger's syndrome, when stepping out of your home environment can often be as a big step outside your comfort zone, especially if you're stepping into an environment where there's a lot of unwritten social skills that you're perhaps not used to, or they're perhaps different from what you may very well expect. There's a lot of different definitions of mindfulness, as you may well have seen within psychology generally. There's been a lot of work in recent years and a lot of studies in recent years done on mindfulness, and there's a lot of different interpretations of the definition of mindfulness, what it actually is. But for the purpose of today's talk, it basically means paying attention to the present moment, where we are in this moment, here and now, in a non-judgmental way. Noticing the very bloom of the present moment symbolised by the orchid, something which blooms for only up to about 3 days of the year. And just some things that mindfulness this isn't, because some conferences that I have done, and from what some people and from what some assumptions that certain people can have about mindfulness, is that certainly in the case of this talk, it's in a secular setting. But mindfulness, though, the practice of mindfulness largely does have its roots in spiritual contexts. But just because it has its roots in a spiritual context, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily conversion to Buddhism or to Hinduism by the back door. I mean, all of the world's major faiths do incorporate some bits and pieces of mindfulness, but it can also be practiced in a purely secular way, and something that it isn't. It's not a doctrine or a rigid or rigid orientated way of living. So it's understandable that people on the autistic spectrum like to have some routine in their lives, which is perfectly understandable, because I like to have at least some routine, even now sometimes. But when it becomes rigid, though, it can defeat the objective of mindfulness by putting pressure on you to establish a rigid routine. Okay. Just a little bit about the diagnosis, and to some extent how it relates to mindfulness, and also life course of autism and Asperger's syndrome. The way I view the diagnosis now is similar to why mountains have base camps, in that the base camp allows mountaineers to be able to take a much needed rest, be able to be in the moment as to where they are, reflecting on what they've come through to get where they are before mentally preparing as well as physically to get to the next part of the destination, which is the summit. Similarly, something that I felt with my Asperger's syndrome diagnosis was, I felt it was a turning point, almost like a life base camp where I could make a review or almost an assessment of myself, being able to gain a much clearer understanding of who I was, including my strengths and weaknesses. And knowing your strengths and weaknesses and a general awareness of who you are as you are, I feel helps you to make often important decisions about what you want to do throughout your life, including decisions about what to study at university, what careers to pursue based on your strengths, and perhaps what to keep away from based on your weaknesses. There's quite often an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis at the point of diagnosis can be seen like a double-edged sword. And first of all, it can be a relief, as it was a huge one for myself, in that you've got for the first time in my life, I felt there was a reason for why I was the way I was and why my life had been as it had been. But at the same time, though, it can also induce a little bit of doubt, because it's a lifelong condition. It's going to be with you for the rest of your life, and often there is a very sizable part of your life that's still to come, and you don't know how it's going to affect you for different parts of your life that you're perhaps not prepared for. But I also felt that there was a third point to an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis at the point of my diagnosis, which was regret for some of the things I felt I'd missed out on when younger. For instance, I missed out on a lot of support I could have had to get me through school. I went through mainstream school undiagnosed, incidentally. Now, this image is a situation that just for a moment I'd like you to imagine yourself in, and it can give you the feeling of how it can be to be a person with Asperger's syndrome experiencing quite a lot of anxiety. So this is part of your route to get to the summit. How it's nearly 1,000 feet high. It looks vertical. How do we feel? Who feels it looks rather hard and demanding? Yes, a few of you. Or is anybody looking forward to the challenge? Right. Just now, when you see how vertical, actually, if you look on closer inspection, you can actually see some blue and red dots in the far left-hand corner, which are actually people climbing up the wall. Now, in this kind of situation where you've got 1,000-foot wall in front of you, you need to get over to get to the next part of the route, which is the route towards the summit. When you see what's immediately in front of you, this is where how your sightings of what's immediately around you can be very deceptive and take you out of the present moment. Because as immediately you may feel a lot of very high level anxiety, thinking that you're not going to be able to do this. This is going to be unbelievably difficult. But quite often, though, once you go into it, it's not actually so vertical. More like a very steep staircase. So sometimes, just by how you see something can take you out of the present moment and induce anxiety. So these are some of the feelings that can be present in day-to-day life of a person with Asperger's syndrome. Confusion. What often comes from confusion is a lot of worry, and something that even now I still don't mind admitting. Something that I am still pretty good at is worrying, and people with Asperger's syndrome themselves are often described as being very good worriers, which can sometimes be about very trivial things that can be rather confusing for other people around them to understand. From worry comes uncertainty, just like uncertainty of how your diagnosis might affect you in the next part of your life that's to come, including for things you're not prepared for or haven't experienced, and fears, another emotion that can come out of uncertainty. What those feelings can lead to are becoming very obsessive, where a worry or a fear becomes a fixation to the extent that it almost is as a lady with Asperger's syndrome at a talk I did a couple of years ago in Middlesbrough described, it almost the very emotion itself almost locks you in. And those are some of the things that those factors can lead to you as a person with Asperger's syndrome, to how it affects you in the present moment, here and now. In comfort zones, and this is a comfort zone that I rather enjoy being in, which is on a train. I do especially enjoy them when they're as punctual as they are in Japan, where they place a very strong emphasis on punctuality and also rapidity of their rail services, and also the onboard comforts as well, with all the foot room that you get on the Shinkansen. So, as a person with Asperger's syndrome, that's how I can feel very set in my ways when I'm on a train. Different individuals with Asperger's syndrome may very well have environments that they enjoy being in, feel very comfortable in, but quite often though, when that environment's taken away from you, it can be like the carpet being pulled from under your feet, as it were. And this is where it starts to get a little bit skiddy. That's something that's rather skiddy to walk on, which is volcano ash. And as a person with Asperger's syndrome, sometimes when the way that you like it in the comfort zone is taken from you, it can be like all of a sudden having to walk on a much easier surface to walk on, a carpet or a rug, to walking on skiddy downhill volcano ash. People with Asperger's syndrome sometimes find a bit of difficulty in being able to, and I'm no different in this sense, being able to react or cope with something that happens unpredictably when you can't foresee it, when you don't foresee something coming. For instance, right at the start of the talk, Liz said that if we have a fire today, it's real and unlikely that it'll happen, but there is the distant possibility, and if it did happen, then it would be a huge step outside the comfort zone that we all feel in now. Just some examples that I had some difficulty with personally, and the anxiety that causes of coming out of an established routine. For instance, moving office at work, and when I was much younger, when I was a child with Asperger's syndrome, moving house, which we did, which the family did a couple of times when I was a child. Now, a little bit like ice at the end, at the snout of a glacier, breaks under pressure from the ice flow. A person with Asperger's syndrome, when under pressure caused by perhaps a break in routine, can become very resistant to change, and can, like ice in a glacier, crack under pressure. And also at this stage, when having to change routine or change comfort zone, avoidance tendencies might also come into play. I don't know if any of you have come across PDA, pathological demand avoidance. There's some, yes, I can see one or two heads nodding, and some there are. It's a quite controversial subject or controversial label at the moment. So I'll not go too deeply into it. Some people that I've heard speak at conferences and say that they have some issues with it, but similarly, people with Asperger's syndrome can also experience similar avoidance tendencies. An example that's used here is an image taken in the Daisen temple in Kyoto in Japan. So what this part is a wall. In the background you can see in the landscape garden some gravel which represents a river, and the rocks represent different animals flowing down the river. So the wall represents a lot of anxiety. The whole river is a journey of life's ups and downs to reach the eventual state of calm, which is the great sea of tranquility, which hopefully we might have reached by the time we go away from here today. Incidentally, what that represents there is a cow that's trying to swim in the opposite direction of the way in which the river's flowing, and as a result is experiencing a lot of frustration and anxiety. But it turns out all right for it in the end, though, so don't worry. Now, something that happened to me on my first meditation retreat, something that I found very inspiring personally, was that where my first meditation retreat was, incidentally, was in a place called Llangollen, which is in Powys in rural Wales. Now, away from the light pollution, you can see so much more stars in the sky than you normally can, and the first night of it happened to be a very clear night, and you could even see a little bit of the arm of the Milky Way. And something that occurred to me while practicing down here on the ground, focusing on the breath and being in here and now in the present moment, up in the sky, some elements of the past I felt were represented by the stars being as they were, however many light years ago they are, showing that your past is actually with you in the present here and now, and that past together with the future weaves into the present, into a continual now almost. So incidentally, the concept of time in Zen Buddhism doesn't have a separate past, present and future, but all three are seen as existing all in one, in a continual now. In our case, now you could say that past, present and future are with us right here where we are in this room now. And I felt it was an inspiring moment for me personally, because it was where two of my favourite interests came together: mindfulness and astronomy. And to help turn Asperger's syndrome to the present moment, or to help to turn stress and anxiety to the present moment generally, in just a moment I'm going to give you a chance, if you want to have a go at a very simple mindfulness practice exercise. Stretch and breath exercises help us to notice regions of the body and feelings from different areas of the body that we take for granted, including being able to notice reservoirs, often in and around the waist, where tension can build up where we're least aware of it. And this is the little exercise I'd like to invite you to participate in, if you would like to. It's called the 3-minute breathing space. Now, you can do this exercise either standing up or sitting on the edge of your chair. I'm going to do it sitting down. Now, chances are there might not be quite the foot room in a lecture hall to do it, but if you can, and most importantly, if you would like to have a go at this exercise, you can sit towards the edge of your seat, keeping your feet nice and comfortable in front of you where you can. It helps to make sure that the back's nice and straight though, so that you can open to the breath and going up and down the lungs, down to the diaphragm. And the hand positions are right hand on top of left hand, or if you're left-handed, the other way around, and your thumbs very, very lightly touching, and you can start by very, very slowly closing your eyes and just notice this breath coming in. Followed by this breath going out. Notice the sensations in and around the nose that each in-breath and out-breath brings. start to notice the effects the breath has around the body. Notice the rising of the lungs on the in-breath and the falling away of the lungs on an out-breath. Noticing any sensations you can feel in and around the body. Perhaps any feelings of discomfort, tension, notice any tendencies perhaps. Now imagine if the whole body itself could breathe. And now, very slowly, open your eyes and finish the practice. Right, how did that feel?
Lovely.
Nice? Anybody?
Strange.
Strange? Right. It can be if it's the first time that you've done it perhaps, or it can be strange because it's a little bit outside your comfort zone to sit with a straight back, because you notice where the breath goes a little bit more in a more pronounced way than you normally do when you're sitting with your back slumped. And that's why it's not always good for us to sit with our back slumped for extended periods of time, which is and I have to admit this, that I do it a bit extensively sometimes when I feel a little bit tired. Something that I find that exercise can help with is this: it helps to go back into normal life after a very short step aside from it, and see things from a refreshed perspective, rather than being set in a particular anxiety or frustration that I might have perhaps been feeling. Something I've also found mindfulness practice helps you to notice, and when I did my first 10-day silent retreat a couple of years ago now, something that I noticed is that when you're sitting, breathing and noticing sensations, something that you notice is that with the way that the human body is, and the way with the materials the human body's made of, and materials generally, certainly when you get down to the atomic level, is that there isn't a real such thing as solidity, because particles go through atoms on a regular basis, including through the human body. Something which is visible on Easter Island with the volcanic rocks that the famous Moai statues are made out of, made of red volcanic rocks, some of them, and something that you notice there when the sun rises and sets is that they change colour because there's light passing through them. And similarly, when you're sitting still meditating, there's particles passing through you which contribute on a very deep level to sensations that are present, but when it was on autopilot, you're not very likely to experience them, and in some cases their quality. And as a person with Asperger's syndrome, something that's sitting still in the environment of a retreat or a general meditation practice that I do in my spare time is that it helps you to notice tendencies that are part of the way that you're affected by Asperger's syndrome, including being able to notice away from practice where you're perhaps sometimes likely to act on them in real life. In some cases, what obsessions or tendencies that you feel you have sometimes trigger in real life. And the managing director at Autism Works will likely tell you about some of the things that trigger me in ordinary life. But something that I do find, though, just by noticing them, is it helps you to gain a little bit more control over how you're affected by them, so that you can control them rather than them controlling you. Now, something else from the 8-week mindfulness course from where I found a lot about myself in a physical context was from some of the stretching movement exercises that are part of the course, some very simple mindful yoga stretching exercises which see you taking up positions of lying flat on the floor to notice different sensations that you don't normally feel when you're standing up or sitting down, as we're not used to lying on the floor being aware at the same time, most of the time at least anyway. I mean, okay, perhaps some of you lie on the floor, with the floor being the beach, and sunbathing when on holiday, but quite often it's very easy to fall asleep when you're sunbathing. But when you're paying attention to sensations lying flat on the floor or taking up a stretching position, it helps you to notice the interconnection of the body a lot more, like the interconnection between the forest and the cloud. So the forest and the cloud depend upon each other for their existence. They exist. This is a Zen concept. Incidentally, it's the concept of interdependence. They exist interdependently on each other. They depend on each other for their existence, but at the same time exist independently, a little bit like the body itself does. Different regions of the body depend on each other, and also as individuals we are interdependent on other people around us, but also lead independent lives within and around other people around us. And it helps also noticing where where your motor skills and the lives. Many people with Asperger's syndrome also experience difficulties with motor coordination, and Asperger's syndrome can in some cases also interexist with dyspraxia. And sometimes, something that I found from the stretchings, it helps me with balance and to be able to notice it, and to notice where it is a lot more so in normal life as well, and to notice, just by noticing the interconnection of the body helps you to notice more so your motor skills and motor coordination. Now this is the part of the talk where it starts to get a little bit more practical. So it's mindfulness of noticing sensory issues. From stretching exercises, incidentally, quite often you can notice different sensations, including the difference between one side of the body and the other when doing a stretch. And at the same time, also around you there are sensations. There's 5 traditional senses, sight, taste, touch, sound and smell. And there's also the sensation that bodily feeling brings, including any pain or discomfort that you can feel, and sensations that come from that, or any tension you might feel, and also some sensations can come from feelings of joy or happiness, much pleasanter ones. And a little exercise that I now have for you is what some of you were asking me about earlier, and this is where you're going to find out what I personally use this for, and what something like this, which is a Tibetan singing bowl, can be used for. It doesn't have to be a Tibetan singing bowl, it can be anything that makes a sustained sound. Before we do the actual practice, I'll just give you a little sample of what it actually sounds like. See if you're okay with it first of all. There are some who don't particularly like the sound. I can see there's one or two of you who don't find it very pleasant. What do we think of the sound? Do we like it? Okay. Yes, you do. Right. You do.
It interferes with my hearing aids.
Oh, right. Right. Okay. We can do this exercise if it's going to be difficult for some people. I don't mind you either leaving the room or covering your ears when are you okay to do it? No, I don't want it to be a painful experience for you. The purpose of mindfulness isn't for it to be painful or anyway, if you'd like to do this exercise, again, if we can take up the position we took before, this is if you want to participate, it's not compulsory. If you just like to take up the similar position with the back nice and straight, and with the feet nice and comfortably in front of you. And then hand position, just for a reminder, right hand on top of left or other way around if you're left-handed. Okay. If you can start the practice by slowly closing your eyes and start by noticing sounds that you can hear immediately around you. Start by noticing how more apparent sounds can become when your sight's turned off with your eyes being closed. Okay, now very gently open your eyes and return to normal. Right. Okay, after you could no longer hear the sound coming from the singing bowl, did anybody notice anything different or unusual even? Were there any sounds that became more apparent when your eyes were closed?
Yeah, the fan in the roof, I could hear it dimly before, but afterwards it sounded really loud.
Right. Yes. A lot of participants do actually say that something that they can notice so much more apparently is the sound coming from the air conditioning, and not so long ago when I did this, somebody said they could notice the ticking of the clock a lot more loudly. Right, yes.
They are called white sound, aren't they?
You could?
They are called white sound for some reason.
White sound?
Just like whenever there's something buzzing and things like that with the lights, everything like that, for some reason.
Yes, you can hear the buzzing coming from the electrical equipment that's running. It does start to become a lot more apparent when your ears are more tuned in. So when you close down your sight, you become a lot more dependent upon your hearing to notice what's in and around you. Okay, moving towards the end of the talk now, something that one of the things I'd like to finish with is how I feel mindfulness practice has helped me, and if any of you are interested to pursue it further, hopefully how it might help you as well. Something that I feel it's helped me with is a stronger awareness of thoughts as they arise and pass, because quite often you act on thoughts, and often on a spur of the moment, some thoughts which are sometimes caused by sensations that are perhaps awkward or unpleasant, which leads you towards making rash decisions sometimes. I find it helps me to make more controlled choice over actions, and can also help when opening up to difficult situations that happen when you least expect them to, by facing up to them and opening to them, to be able to take stock of the situation, of the unpredicted or unforeseen incidents, to be able to see it in the context of the present moment, and to help you choose or form the appropriate action over it. And something that I'd like to close on, and which is, if any of you are interested in taking up mindfulness practice or finding out more about it, is something that helps to make a point of saying, is that it's where it works best is when it's sought by choice rather than it's being enforced on you. And it also helps, as mindfulness practice helps people in many different ways, and bearing in mind people with Asperger's syndrome are very different as individuals, as if you know different people with Asperger's syndrome, you'll know that they're affected very differently by their Asperger's, and they're very different as individuals and as people generally. So it'll likely have different effects for different individuals on the autistic spectrum, and it can be very easy to have just like for any therapies, to have some expectations about how it's either going to make your life better or it's going to change your life. But it doesn't happen overnight with mindfulness. That's an old lantern clock that's in Rufford Old Hall in Cheshire. Those of you sitting nearer the front might notice something a little bit unusual about it compared to modern clocks.
Is there only one hand?
It's only got one hand, yes, because during the 16th century when the clock was used at Rufford Old Hall, it was before mass industrialisation, which required much more precise timings. So time was more fluent and much more dependent upon agricultural time. But the effects of mindfulness don't necessarily happen within human created time or human conventional time as we like to measure it as a species, but rather they occur in natural or botanical time. And in the case of what I've included in the background in this slide, the Northern Lights, just to show you how calendar time isn't fixed or permanent, like nothing really is, including our very own lives aren't fixed or permanent, and that materials around us aren't fixed or permanent, is that for the Northern Lights to occur, the sun has to lose mass, and when the sun loses mass, its gravitational hold on the Earth and the other planets becomes weaker, which makes Earth's orbital period and thus the calendar year gradually longer. So the effects of mindfulness don't come through in fixed clock or even calendar time, but are more likely to come through in natural time. And hopefully eventually we'll all find our way by whatever route, and there's numerous different routes. There's numerous different routes to how a river reaches the sea, which, apart from the Okavango River in Africa, all rivers on Earth, just about all rivers on Earth, do eventually, but they reach it in different ways. And similarly, you can reach a state of tranquility in different ways to the Great Sea of Calm, which is where the river that was in the temple that you saw earlier is eventually flowing into. And it helps you to find flow in life generally, whatever you do, by it helps also when setting any goals or ambitions, to rather than reach a goal or target, doing something to reach that. It helps to do something, whether it's to run a marathon, like we had the London Marathon yesterday, or in the case of at a university, to complete a master's or PhD thesis, not to do it to get that medal or certificate at the end of it, but do it to actually do the marathon or do the work required to get your thesis. And at that point I'd like to close it, and that's my personal website. If any of you want to contact me later, ask me anything about what I've talked about, and you're free to do through that link. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm open to any questions you have over coffee or right here and now, if anybody wants to raise anything. Thank you.